Hi, Mitchell Levy here, global credibility expert, and I'm so glad to have you join me for one of the funnest times of my day when I get to talk to a super cool human somewhere from the planet. I haven't found anyone off the planet yet about who they are and how they show up in life. And Leo Bottary is no exception. Leo, welcome.
Hey, I'm just glad I could fill in for the super cool human that you were looking for today. It's all good.
Well, I think by the end of this, people will know that this is you, that you are that
All
guy.
right,
So,
there we go.
um, so, so Leo, so the audience knows who are you?
So I am a husband, I am a dad, and I am the founder and managing partner of Peernovation LLC. And I basically work with peer advisory groups, CEOs and key executives alike, as well as with teams inside organizations to take what CEO peer advisory groups have been doing so brilliantly for so long and how to maximize the value for people in their groups and how to apply these principles to the teams in your companies.
Nice. Well, tell me about the dad part of your life.
That part of my life is great. So I've got two daughters, and I also have a bonus son and a bonus daughter, all over 30. Uh, Doing terrifically well. They're great kids. They are unbelievably close. And they're just happy. And as a parent, you just couldn't be, more thrilled for them and what they're doing. So it's just a matter of, making sure they keep it up and it's all good.
So, as a parent, and either direction's good. What did you learn as a parent that you brought into your job, or do your kids occasionally go, "Hey, Dad, this is job stuff. Don't parent me this way." What? Give me a story.
Um, I'm not sure. I think there's some real selflessness that comes from being a parent. You realize pretty clearly it's not all about you. But I also think that most of the lessons, if you will, that I hope I've imparted on our kids have been not spoken lessons so much as I think I shared with you this very brief story about how this was for Kristen and Taylor and I, my two daughters, and I took them to climb their first mountain peak in Colorado. And we're climbing the mountain, and they're all enthusiastic and excited about it. This is like a 12,800 foot peak. It's supposed to be easy to moderate, but we know better, right? This is difficult. It is, and you get above the tree line, and the air gets thinner, the climb gets steeper, and I start hearing things like, "Hey, view looks pretty good from here," you know, or we were talking about like weather coming in the afternoons. There's like a puff of white cloud near the peak, and one of them says, "Hey, Dad, is that a weather up there that we need to be concerned about? We need to turn around." I said, "No, I think we're all right." So clearly, I'm not taking the hint that these guys are getting done with this whole, mountain climb. That sounded like a really great idea, but what they got caught into was this trap of staring at the peak. And this is what everyone does when they're climbing the mountain. They constantly look up at that peak, and what happens is you climb for 10 minutes, you climb for 15 minutes, and it does never appears to be getting any closer, and it is emotionally debilitating in addition to the physical demands you're dealing with. So next thing you know, they finally just said, "Hey, we're kind of done. We're we think we're kind of tapped out here." So I said, "Tell you what, let's climb for 10 more minutes. Let's mark where we are." They didn't quite know while I was saying this, and there was a bush, kind of a large bush coming out of a big rock. And I said, "Okay, let's climb for 10 more minutes. And after 10 minutes, if you guys are done, no questions asked, we're off the mountain." Great. So they're setting their watches now. And to the second, it gets to 10 minutes, and they're like, "All right, we're done." First thing they do is look at the peak, and they say, "Look, this peak is no closer than it was 10 minutes ago." I said, "Look behind you." And that bush that we left looked like the tiniest dot in the landscape. And they were just blown away by the progress they make. Next thing you know, they're climbing another 10, they're climbing another 15 minutes. They summited that day. And so it's kind of things like that that they took with them as leadership lessons today with people who, and they recognize that keeping your eye on the prize, that staring at that peak all the time is not the way to go. It's to recognize how far we've come. Let's make sure that we constantly get our team together, celebrate our accomplishments, and that gives us that fuel to press on and keep putting one foot in front of the other. And then we can enjoy, the real, I mean, the awesome sight of standing on top of that peak and the feeling that comes with that. So I would give that as an example of at least one way that I would try to get them to take lessons that I'd like to think will remain with them.
Hmm. How about something that you learn from your kids, particularly one in where you're feeling like you're not the center of the universe, which once you're a parent, you know that immediately, that you then applied in a client?
That's a great question. Um, I could say something really bad in that parenting sometimes is like dog training. The more that you walk away, the more likely they're to come toward you versus the other way around, um, which is true. It can be with everything, every kind of relationship we have. But no, in all seriousness, though, I think that the, I wouldn't say it's one lesson so much as my kids keep me current. In addition to the work I
Mm.
do as an adjunct professor for Rutgers, where I can work with students, there's definitely a relationship today. But when I was growing up, you were just a kid. You didn't know anything. There was nobody cared about my opinion on stuff and what was going on. That was just the way it was. Today, I think we recognize the difference between, you know, generations ago and today, and how much we can learn from our kids and how much they can keep us current. And I think that that has incredible implications when it comes to today's workplace and then the relationship that generation of kids wants to have with their leadership versus what was the situation when we were getting started in our careers. So that, I think, is you can really see how that starts to cross over in a major way.
Well, so obviously the name of your company, Peernovation. The interesting part is how do you address the command and control style leader who grew up? I mean, yeah, I grew up the same way. Kids are to be seen, not heard, and there's no reason I'd have any opinion when I was young on older people or their business. But nowadays, yep, same thing. My son keeps me current. The interactions I have with people who are in their 20s absolutely keeps me current. And I occasionally run across somebody running a company that they don't feel their people have any value in that way.
Right. Oh,
How do you
no
deal
doubt.
with that? What are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Well, I think it's important that we've both made the distinction that our kids may not keep us young, but they keep us current. So that's good.
I think he I think he keeps me young too, but I hear you.
um, so here's an interesting thing. In fact, I'm just completing this now, working with this woman, Meredith Bell, who runs a wonderful business out of Virginia, and we're creating an assessment for peer innovation, and it's called a peer innovation readiness assessment. Actually, the kind of leader you're talking about would score very low on that assessment. And it's one of those assessments, from my perspective, that the higher you score on it, the more likely you are a good candidate for what I do and what I do with people. So if you're the kind of leader who cares about their people, who cares what they think, who wants to be inclusive, in things. There's a great quote from Thomas Jefferson who basically said, in matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock. So I guess I'm looking for leaders who say, hey, we're not compromising our values, we're not compromising our quality or anything like that. But you know what? If we're going to have a distributed workforce today, I'm willing to listen to how we deliver on that in a way that creates a productive, healthy, happy workplace for our people. And let's talk about what that looks like, because that could be obviously very different than pre-COVID, for example. So I think for leaders like that, what I do is very beneficial for them. For leaders who are not and who are not willing to change, I think that becomes really difficult. That's a stretch for everybody. And probably, I'm asked all the time about what industry, what size company is peer innovation right for? It isn't really so much of that. It's about the type of leader that this is a good fit with, who can embrace it and really truly embody it in a way that will make it work throughout an entire organization. Not someone who just understands the concepts and at the first sign of something going awry is going to lean back into their old ways. So, um, so I guess the short answer is I don't work much with the type of leaders you're talking about. And I'm all right with that, by the way.
So that's interesting. So okay, so you're creating this assessment, and is the assessment to determine whether or not it's a client you can work with, or is it one in which to determine from where they are today, so you can then determine where they're going and where they need help?
It's both, and it's in fairness to both, really. I think that, oftentimes people get into these engagements and they're not quite sure what they're in for on either side. I think what this readiness assessment allows us to have the kind of conversations and create the kind of clarity with one another up front in terms of what this is about, what success looks like for them and for us, and to be clear on that. And if we can have a meeting in the minds which says, this is great for both of us, let's have at it and do it, then we do. And if not, then that's okay, because there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work out there that may be a better fit. And I've always been perfectly willing to accept that. In fact, in many cases, I've had people who, based on the nature of what they're looking for, I'll say, you know what, I don't know that could I do it? Sure. Am I the best person to do it? Maybe not. Here's some people I think you should also talk to. And I think that's kind of what it's about. And, if there's anything I've learned in my career is that if you lead with a spirit of generosity, lead with a spirit of openness and transparency, I think it always comes back in the right way.
How do you see that? How do your people see that? That spirit of
Meaning,
generosity. How is
um,
that viewed?
I think
How do
so.
they interpret it?
Yeah, I think one thing is I think that there's a lot of folks that are surprised at how much content I make available for free to anybody who wants it, and it's accessible to anybody who wants it. You go to my website, it would take you months to go through all of the content. I mean, many months to go through all of the content that's available there on a wide range of subject areas where, um, you know, and I've always kind of been suspect in many respects of people who are more stingy with their content because it kind of makes me feel like that's all they got, you know? So, um, there may be not much more than that. So they hold on tightly to not, giving away the quote their secrets. And I think the reality is that when you really start getting into what's involved in doing a lot of this stuff really well, you're not going to pick it up from reading a book or reading an article or anything like that. I think you know very well. I mean, there isn't anyone who I know who knows more about books and publishing books than you do. And I think when you think about a book and putting it together, most people believe that you have a bunch of blank pages and you're trying to fill a couple hundred pages, right? The reality is that usually you have 1,500 to 2,000 pages of notes that you're trying to cull down into something that's actually manageable and readable and tells a story and does it in a way that's really coherent and I think is powerful to the audience. So when you start looking at some of this stuff and thinking, okay, you know, maybe you could do it yourself, whatever, and God bless you, and give it a try, and it may work out great and all that. But I think the reality is that just because you read somebody's book, I don't care if you read it 10 times, that doesn't mean you know what they know about the subject. Um, and so I think there's that aspect of things where I'm very comfortable giving away all of those. I actually have a DIY version of Peernovation that people can do with their executive leadership team or with your company that doesn't involve me at all, and they can have it. You think about how many organizations there are in this world. I can't serve them all, you know, and even with the delivery systems today on things where I would provide other products that would be paid. Now they just are obviously a whole different level of complexity and engagement and all of that, but I think that if you want to show someone that you've got the substance it takes to actually work with their company and make a difference, then I think those who lead with generosity, those who, like Patrick Lencioni will say, is just start working with the client. Just start being that person and start building that trust. And that's how to get started.
I'm also of the belief today that information and ideas are ubiquitous,
You bet.
and therefore uh, putting your information out there is key, and actually exactly having a DIY product for those people who are a DIY audience. It
Mhm.
got me thinking about your client base, and what would be interesting is, could you identify what are the top 3 sort of pain points? What are the top 3 things that that when you initially work with that perfect set of clients, what are the top 3 things that they typically need to work on?
By far, clarity is the first one. There's a lack of clarity. And by the way, you have generations in the workplace today, as you know, you've got millennials and Gen Zs, which by 2025 are going to be 64% of the workforce. By 2030, they'll be 75% of the workforce. The level of transparency, the level of, how they engage one another, their propensity not to trust leadership blindly, all of these kinds of things kind of come into play. Yeah.
All right, so clarity, by the way, obviously big thing for me. What are
Well, it's
the other
huge,
2?
and the clarity piece obviously speaks to. I think you and I may have chatted about this before, with Grammarly and Harris Poll having a study that came out for the first time last year, suggesting that U.S. companies alone lose $1.2 trillion annually due to ineffective communication. It's a staggering number. And by the way, you'll also see in that study, if you look on one of the pages there, that I believe it was like 82 or 83% of the knowledge workers who participated in the study all think they're great communicators. So if no one's going to look in the mirror and no one's, this is just, and I think when they ran the study in 2023, rather than go into the absurd and suggest that, oh, it's 1.5 trillion now or 1.6 trillion, they started just digging into some of the issues around clarity. So I think it's a worthwhile study, by the way. Second is, and this is a big one for organizations and CEOs in particular and all of that, and that's creating psychological safety in your company. There is no greater gift to a CEO than to have information flow in a way that it is made available to people in a timely way so that you can respond to things that can be solved with a phone call today. But if you find out about it 3 months from now, 6 months from now, because someone wants to bury it or hide it or something like that, now you've got a major catastrophe on your hand. Not to mention that we work very hard to try to hire the right people, if you will, right? Interview techniques and assessments and all these things we do. That's great, except the last thing you want to do is hire that right person and somehow put them in a box because they don't feel comfortable asking questions or admitting mistakes or contributing ideas or challenging the process or challenging the leader. I want that full person and all the gifts they have to bring to the table in pursuit of the common purpose we agreed upon was the reason that they wanted to join our company. So I think when you have that, so I'd say clarity, psychological safety, and I think that the other side of that psychological safety coin is accountability. And I think trying to help people reimagine what accountability looks like. Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School does has a wonderful 2x2, which basically shows the relationship between psychological safety and accountability. They are not opposites; they are necessary to one another. The more psychological safety we have, the more we are able to set high standards for ourselves, have greater candor in the workplace, set clear expectations for ourselves and others about what we want to do and how we can be high performing together. So, I think when it comes to those things like clarity, psychological safety, and accountability, I would say those are the top three things that we deal. To a certain degree, we touch on obviously the other factors like productivity. How do we actually, you know, help the team be more productive? And then also from a leadership perspective, even if a CEO embodies all of these great traits that can help really create an inclusive environment, that doesn't mean all their direct reports are doing exactly the same thing. And when we look at cross-functional work teams in particular, it's very common, as you know, that you'll have a CMO, a CFO, CHRO, whatever, they're all sitting there and they come to convene as kings and queens of their own departments. Like it's their budget, their people, their pet programs, and all this kind of stuff. And I think when you can get a cross-functional work team working together and letting them know that the reason you are in this room isn't because you are so great at your discipline. It's because you have the ability to take off your department hat and put on your enterprise hat. You're going to give us your perspective from your area, which is crucially important. But by the same token, this is about what's best for the company. So if I'm the CMO and my budget's going to take a hit for a while because we have to make other investments elsewhere, that's what we're going to do. It's going to come around at some point that we're going to need marketing to play a more lead role, for example. So I think when you can create that kind of trust in a cross-cultural environment among the senior leadership team, you can start building that trust in the rest of your organizational teams as well.
It's so funny. I found, by the way, as you were talking, I found the poll that you referred to. I found a PDF and I shared it in the notes. So for those who are interested in reading about it, please do. And it was interesting that I'm going to end back on clarity, but I wanted to actually say on accountability was very interesting. So I'd love for you to comment on this, and we'll come back to clarity afterwards. I did a poll on LinkedIn, and I basically said, how many people are accountable? You know, are you self-accountable? Do you have a coach? Do you do something to do it? And something like 63% of people said they were accountable. And as soon as I got that number, that they were good at it, by the way, as soon as I got that number, I realized, oh, I asked the wrong question. So I asked a different question. In your network, what percentage of people are 100% accountable to you? Right? Because I figured that would be a better way to do it. And it turns out that number is only 10%. And it was really, now, I would say based on the numbers, they were statistically significant. I'm not sure you could put these two things together, but it was really fascinating. And so I understand on accountability. And when I talk to other people, what that means, I understand safety. And in today's world, oh my God, that means so many different things. And we may have time for both of those, but on clarity, given that was your number one, what is it is it the individual clarity? Is it the group clarity? Is it the company clarity? What is that primary focus?
So on every level, in fact, when the CEO as servant leader oftentimes says to the team, what could I do to help this team be more successful? Clarity is the number one thing. They want to know, how does my work connect to our overall goals? How am I doing? Clarity on every level about all kinds of things. They just really don't want any ambiguity around what they believe are the key things that should be driving their work. And what happens is when people don't communicate, when something as simple as someone's going to meet you for lunch and you're sitting there and it's noon, and then it's 5 after, and then it's 10 after, you haven't heard anything, you have a gap of information there. Your head starts going as to, where are they and what's going on? And we fill in gaps in information because we're terrible at letting them just sit there and wait to find out what's really going on. And this happens all the time. There's a thing I do with cross-functional work teams, let's say at a director level. Well, I'll ask the marketing person, hey, what does the finance person do all day? I don't know. Says no to me. Okay. And then, right. And then it was kind of the idea. Well, they have no idea what they do. They have no idea what their constraints are in their job. They get upset when they try to get something approved and it doesn't happen. They don't know why. They don't ask. Now, all of a sudden, all of these rifts start happening that are completely unnecessary, with people. That's just one tiny example of what's going on and how it can impact the personal dynamics of what's happening. People don't typically know each other's stories very well. They know each other as coworkers at a certain degree, but not as people nearly enough. And so there's an aspect of this that when we very intentionally sit people down and have conversations about what do I expect of myself and others, you know, and then we talk about psychological safety and what would make people feel more psychologically safe. Timothy Clark wrote a great book called The Four Stages of Psychological Safety, where he talks about this idea of having a sense of belonging. And that's really where it starts. Just people to feel that sense of belonging and from there move to a sense of bonding where they can start doing, the other things we talked about in terms of asking questions, contributing ideas, and challenging, the process or the leader, if that, when that serves the organization, right? Yeah. So there's a lot
Nice.
to unpack, and it's interesting, and I'm glad you asked the question because um, it is so important, and we just flat out don't. We're not intentional enough. I think is the word that keeps coming forward when I'm working with a lot of clients is just intentionality. How do we create a new level of intentionality about the things that we know are important? How do we not feel like we've checked off the box and we move on to other things when we've got a very dynamic situation going on? And the moment you stop paying attention to something will be the moment you'll have to start worrying about it.
Hmm. Interesting. Hey, I'm gonna. I think we're doing really well on time, and I think what I'll do is for those people who are really interested and they want to learn more about you or Peernovation, what is the best way for them to reach out to you? And stick around, guys, because the last question is always the coolest.
So, my LinkedIn profile, I think, really not only provides a lot of information, but feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out or write me a note or something of that nature. You can also go to leobottary.com and you can visit my website and you can schedule an appointment there. Again, you can look at a ton of content that'll give you a really good feel for what Peernovation is all about, which, as you know, is this word peer, people of like status, and innovation, creativity realized. And it's essentially what happens when we have we put together people who have, I think a common understanding and a shared values, but yet offer different perspectives and how they can create something larger than themselves when they work together effectively. So, but yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn and on my website.
Nice. All right. So, last question. Given how this conversation went, and half hour always goes by so amazingly fast, is there a question that I should have asked you that I didn't, or is there a way in which you'd like to summarize what we talked about?
Well, one of the things that I think drives a lot of this work and that has come into play in particular over the last year is I think identified as I go to more and more companies, more groups, and all that, that none of us celebrate nearly enough. Remember that
Mm,
story I told about, Kristen and Taylor climbing the mountain and the
yeah.
importance and the
Yeah.
value of celebrating your progress, not constantly just looking at how far you still have to go and lamenting, about that. And I think the more that we can come together and again be intentional about celebrating small wins, we're not only going to have, I think, a healthier and happier workforce, but we're going to get a lot of those big wins far more often.
Hmm. I love that, by the way. I'm so glad you mentioned it. Just so I could actually deploy it myself, I have a vision of what that means. What would give me a couple examples, like how best should we be celebrating these small wins or big wins?
I think people should choose their own celebrations, and I'm not copping out in the answer by saying that. I think oftentimes as leaders, we think we know, hey, we'll give them this, we'll give them this reward, we'll do this, that, or the other because we think it would be cool, so we're going to go ahead and implement these things when in fact how nice is that? Again, it's about clarity. Asking folks, hey, if we're to celebrate this, what would be a great way to celebrate this thing? What would you all enjoy um, uh, to make you feel that it is, kind of worthy of the accomplishment we just had, and will set the stage for us to go, to the next step. And I think when you do that and you include folks in that conversation, it makes a big difference.
Hmm. Those are really, what a great way to end this conversation. I'm summarizing the biggest issues. Clearly, clarity is number one. I've identified that one as well. Psychological safety in today's world, craziness, agreed. Accountability. Those are three great things. And then allowing leaders not just to learn from everyone and grow for everyone, but to celebrate instead of the whip. you
Yeah,
know, it's the let's celebrate more, and let's let our people decide how best to celebrate. I love that. Thank you.
yeah. Leave your whip at home. You know. Yeah, that's what I say.
Leo, that was absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. You did a great job.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are most welcome. And for those that are here, this is now time for you to spread some cred dust. This is a time where you write the aha moments that were relevant to you. You click on the like button, you share with your friends. And I'm so looking forward to seeing you at the next episode of Leaders Living Their Values. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care. Bye now.